Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. I appreciate you tuning in. One of the things I really enjoy about podcasting is, well, I guess there are two things, and they kind of feed on each other. One is I do have guests on the program, as you know. Occasionally I'll have guests. Really kind of at this point, at least once a week I'm having a guest. But I also like to talk about just networking in general and kind of give my insights and things that I have seen out there. But what I see is happening is that I have guests on the program, and there are various types of guests. I have guests who really kind of talk about the how-to network. I have guests who kind of get into the inner workings of it. I have guests who talk about the psychology of it. But what I'm finding is interesting is that guests often lead me to programs, and then when I do a program, programs will often lead me to guests. It's really kind of an interesting dynamic. Little aside, doesn't really have a whole lot of value from the podcast standpoint, but one thing kind of leads to the other. And the reason I bring that up is today we're going to dive into a program which was a result of an interview that I did. And I did the interview, released the interview back on December 12th. If you had an opportunity to listen to it, it was with Diane Darling, and she's the author of the Networking Survival Guide. And if you had an opportunity to listen to that, well, if you didn't have an opportunity, it was episode 131, and it came out on December 12th. So you can go back and give that a quick listen. It's about 30 minutes long. Very insightful. Diane is somebody who really kind of gets into the nuts and bolts of networking. But one of the things she talked about, and we kind of just touched on it towards the end, is that she has some information that's free to download on her website. And so if you were to text the word Diane, text D-I-A-N-E to 345-345, that will lead you to a chart that she has called How to Work a Room. So after that particular program, that's what I did. I went on and I texted Diane to 345-345. And I'll put this in the show notes. It's also in the show notes for episode 131. I'll keep repeating it so you go ahead and get it. But it's really kind of an interesting little infograph of how to work a room. And I'm not going to read it verbatim because that's not fair to Diane. I suggest you go get it. And she has lots of really neat stuff on her website, and her book is very insightful as well. But I kind of wanted to go through the various steps that she talks about with respect to how to work a room. Now, I will tell you, and she mentioned it in the podcast, there's a book out there called How to Work a Room, The Ultimate Guide to Making Lasting Connections in Person and Online. And that's actually in its 25th anniversary. There's a 25th anniversary edition coming out on that particular book. And it was written by a woman by the name of Susan Rowan. I don't want there to be any confusion. Diane's infograph is simply a one-page document that kind of walks through 14 different steps for working a room. And Suzanne Rowan's book, How to Work a Room, is a book. It's a couple hundred pages. So totally separate. One is not the other. Anyhow, to go into Diane's program here, to kind of go through Diane's infograph, she has, like I said, 14 points, and I want to share those as much as I can. Again, I want you to go get it, but reading it verbatim is kind of a ripoff. But anyhow, let me jump right in. First point that she makes is don't go in cold. Do some research before you go to a networking event. And certainly depends upon the networking event. Some networking events are so loosely put together that there's really not a whole lot to research. But a lot of them you have some access to know who's going there. And once you have an idea who's going there, with the wonder of LinkedIn and Google, you can find out about people who you could find out about the people who are there just by certainly doing a search. Likewise, if you've been to events before and you see typical people there, I go to a Business First Breakfast. It's a It's a monthly event put on in Columbus, Ohio. The usual suspects, I call them the usual suspects, are there. And so I might see somebody and not have an opportunity to talk to them, but I can see their name and I can look them up on LinkedIn and find out a whole lot about them before I decide to approach them or not. So her first point is don't go in cold. Have some information before you head in. Certainly have information as to what type of an event it is. Is it just going to be mingling? Is there going to be a program? Certainly knowing where it's at. Sometimes I go to networking events and the rooms are kind of broken up. Others, it's more of a large hall. Sometimes going in, you can find out that it's really sort of difficult to talk to people. Others, it's a great environment for talking to people. So knowing those things on the front end is very helpful. Second point she makes is travel light. She brings a small portfolio with her. I tend not to have anything with me. I wear a sport coat usually, and we'll have one pocket for outbound cards and one pocket for inbound cards, or perhaps in a shirt. I don't tend to meet lots of people at these. Over a couple hours, I might meet 3 or 4 people, so I don't have a lot of cards going in and out, but certainly there are some, and I want to kind of keep it straight. But she's much the same way. She wants to minimize fumbling, so she travels light. She says she carries with her a small wallet with 2 pockets, one for outbound cards, one for inbound cards. So it's pretty simple for her. She kind of knows the game plan. And it's always kind of cumbersome when you come across somebody and you ask them for a card and they're stumbling and reaching for all their pockets like you've asked them for money. And it just, it feels awkward, like, hey, don't worry about it, is what I kind of want to say. Or they're reaching in a bag and they're going through cards and they're other people's cards. It kind of goes with the first point. Don't go in cold, be somewhat prepared. Her third point is walk the walk. And essentially what she means by walk the walk is look like you want to be there. Be confident. Don't fold your arms. Be optimistic, be happy, be smiling, make eye contact with people. It's why you're there. Don't have that look on your face like my mom made me come here sort of a thing. Again, you can get this infographic simply by texting Diane, Diane, to 345-345. It's just a simple one-page chart. But her fourth point is, and when I first read it, I was like, oh, I disagree with this. Her fourth point is start with breakfast. And when I go to events like the Breakfast with Business First or other events where there's food, I tend to avoid food. For me, it's kind of cumbersome to, I might have a cup of coffee in my hand, but to have a plate or trying to be eating while I'm trying to talk, I just don't think those things go together. I can eat at home or I can grab something afterwards. I'm not there for a free meal. But what her point is that people are really open to talking around the food. And as she mentions it, I have to say I find that to be absolutely true. Around the coffee, around the water, around the beverages, around the refreshments, people tend to be more open to a conversation as to when they're standing out in the middle of wherever. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I'll find a psychologist who can kind of explain it, to get Tim Scherer back on, and we can kind of talk about it, why there's this openness around food. But it's true. People are very open around food, and it's a wonderful place to meet people. The fifth thing she recommends is kind of scan the room, kind of get a sense as to who's there, who's talking to who. Certainly if it's someplace you've been before, or there are people that you know there, and you see people talking, you have a sense as to what the different conversations might be or why a certain person is talking with somebody else. But sort of give yourself a lay of the land as to what's happening in the room. The sixth thing that she talks about is approach the VIP first. And that could be the person who's speaking. If you know who that person is, it could be the person who's putting the event on. And the point she makes is good, certainly with respect to the speaker. If there is a speaker, once the speaker has spoken, they're going to be inundated with people. So if you want an opportunity to talk to the speaker, the best time is to talk to them beforehand. And don't occupy a lot of their time, just a simple, hey, thanks, I wanted to say hello before you had an opportunity to speak. If you know the people who put the event on, it's a great opportunity to thank them. It certainly raises your level of exposure with them. Putting these events on is not easy. I don't do them consistently, but I've done them enough to know that it's a lot of work. It's more than just finding a place. There's 100 little moving parts that all have to kind of be working in conjunction with one another. So approaching someone, introducing yourself and saying, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to put this on for us. They might be making money doing it, and that's fine. They've still made the effort of doing it and giving you the opportunity to bring people together. So take the time to certainly thank people. The other point she makes is look for the lone wolves, the people standing off by themselves, the people who are a little out of place. Those are individuals who are certainly open to having a conversation. Besides, it's much harder to integrate yourself within a group. The lone wolves, the people standing by themselves, certainly appreciate the fact that you're coming up to talk to them, and it's easier on you. You don't have to kind of stand outside of a group and kind of put yourself into the conversation appropriately, tastefully, unawkwardly. With the lone wolf, you can strike up a conversation. I've done programs on making small talk, and you can refer back to those, and we'll talk on that, I'm sure, more. Her 8th point is about connecting with others. She asks them about themselves so she can figure out what their interests are and maybe their connection to the event, whatever it might be, but striking up a conversation, kind of getting them talking first. And then when they kind of ask about her, I thought this was interesting, but what she does is she goes ahead, and I'll read this. She says, I'm with Effective Networking. We help companies and people figure out where to network and refine their networking skills. My name is Diane Darling. And the reason she does that is she states her name at the end. When somebody says, well, who are you? She'll go ahead and she'll talk about what she does first and puts her name at the end, because then they're more likely to remember it. And that's always one of the big challenges we have, is people kind of spew their name and then they go into this long, what they do, and you tend to forget their name. And that can always be awkward or embarrassing, because then the person needs to clarify the name, and so she'll tend to put it at the end. I thought that was a neat little trick, and I need to try and remember that. Then she talks about shaking hands, or she puts it, press the flesh. She will extend her hand. She'll put her hand out first, just to kind of show that she's interested in meeting. And she says, shake hands at the beginning, and then when you kind of break apart, when the small talk conversation or the meeting has ended, shake hands again. And she kind of indicates that women really need to focus on this, because it's not as natural for women as it is for men. I can't speak to that. Diane studies this and does this more than I am. I'm not a woman. I guess I've never really thought about it. I'll probably try and notice it now. But that's what she had indicated in here. She talks about being curious. Ask open-ended questions. And again, I've done programs on small talk, and it's really about getting the other person talking, and you're best served by having those open-ended questions that really gets the other person talking, because when they start talking about where they're from or how they got into business or what they're really passionate about, it can open up the door for lots of other little conversations, other little paths you can choose. But certainly be curious about people when they talk about, how'd you get here from Oklahoma City or wherever it might be. It's good to be curious. Number 11, exchange business cards, and that gets back to being ready with your business cards, kind of knowing where your business cards are and what you're going to be doing with their business cards. And she reminds us she's got a different place for cards she gets as opposed to the card she gives, so there's not any confusion there. She's kind of prepared with that on the front end, and it's a very simple thing to prepare. Again, I'll have one in one pocket and another in another pocket and kind of keep track. And I think it's important to keep track, because if I'm going to be introducing somebody or later somebody's saying, well, I saw you talking to somebody, who was that? I don't want to be fumbling around or panic because I can't find somebody's card. There's nothing more embarrassing. Well, there's a lot of things more embarrassing, but it's certainly embarrassing to have to go back to somebody and say, hey, I lost your card. We just talked 10 minutes ago, but I've already lost your card. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want it to happen to you. So it's best you kind of have a plan as to where business cards are going and where they're coming from as you hand them out. It sort of kind of speaks to the whole notion that, remember, you don't get judged on how many cards you hand out or how many cards you get back. It's really about developing relationships. So in a couple-hour event, I might meet 4 or 5 people, maybe as little as 2 or 3, probably not many more than 6. Diane mentioned a similar rule of thumb when we spoke, and I know she mentions that in her book as well. Anyhow, just something to think about. She talks about meeting people, and it can be, and this is her 12th point, it can be a whole lot more powerful to get an introduction to somebody than just kind of going up to them cold. So if you know that somebody knows somebody you would like to meet, getting them to introduce you can be a very powerful thing. It can really warm up the relationship from the standpoint of the person who's introducing you is really kind of lending trust to you. So the person you're meeting knows that there's already a relationship between you and the person who's making the introduction. And if the person making the introduction trusts you, certainly that trust will extend to them in giving you the time of a conversation. It can be a powerful thing. Number 13 in her 14-point infographic is give and take. And as much as having people introduce you is powerful, you doing the same for others. So as you know of people and you know 2 people and they don't know each other, taking the time to make those introductions and helping others out is a powerful thing. You're certainly building favor with individuals out there. I find every time I introduce somebody, there's 2 people who are happy with me. So taking the time to do those sorts of things really makes you a valuable asset to have at networking events. And then the final point she makes, calls it's a wrap. She makes the point that you have to have a plan for following up. Yeah, you've gone through all this effort of talking to the number of people that you've talked to. You've got cards. They've got your cards. The onus is on you to follow up. They may say they're going to follow up, and they may well do that. But if for some reason they lose your card or something happens, the onus is on you. If you would want a relationship to come from this, it's really up to you to make it happen. And she makes this point in the final bubble, which I think is important for us to state here. Remember, you're not there to close deals or get a job. You're there to get the right to follow up with a phone call or meeting over coffee. Even one contact like that makes the whole day worthwhile. So the event is not about closing business. It's about making relationships and just kind of getting things kicked off. Again, this is an infographic that's been put together by Diane Darling, and you can get a copy of it and go through it. It's a nice thing to have. You can get it by texting Diane, D-I-A-N-E, to 345-345, and it's called How to Work a Room. I recommend getting it and taking a look at it. Finally, to wrap up, remember AmSpirit Business Connections. We have a unique franchise opportunity that involves helping small businesses become more successful through a referral-based networking program. As a franchisee, it only involves a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, and is a great franchise for an attorney, an accountant, realtor, business coach, consultant to add on to what they're already doing. All of our franchisees do something else. For a few hours in the morning, they're working this franchise program. The rest of the week, they're doing something else. Why just be a renter when you can own the building? Why just be in a business networking group when you can own a series of business networking groups? If you're interested, there's an email at the end of this program or one in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.